Part 1. When I close my eyes, I can still see the kitchen of my childhood. A low wooden table, its surface polished smooth by countless meals, a clay pot quietly bubbling on the stove, and the soft sound of my grandmother's slippers brushing against the old floor. That place was the center of our world, a space where laughter and stories floated in the air, mingling with the scent of freshly cooked rice and soup. To me, as a child, it felt like magic. But to my grandmother, it was simply home. Every Sunday, our family gathered at her house. Cousins, uncles, aunts all crammed into the small room. The table was always too small, yet somehow there was always enough food. Eat more, she would say, placing another piece of meat on my rice bowl, even when my stomach was already full. We never questioned how she managed to feed everyone. Only later did I realize the secret was never in the amount of food, but in the heart she poured into it. Patience, care, and love. As children, we loved sitting near the fire. The flames danced, shadows moved across the wall, and my grandmother's face glowed softly in the light. She would stir the soup and tell us stories, memories of her youth, tales of village festivals, and times when life was hard, but laughter was stronger. Sometimes she lowered her voice, almost whispering. "This soup," she said, "is not just food. It's medicine for the heart." We didn't understand then, but we listened, wide-eyed, as if her words were spells. One day, curiosity got the better of me. "Grandma, why does your stew taste different from Mother's?" She smiled softly, patted my head, and said, "Because I use one ingredient she doesn't know." My eyes widened. "What is it? Tell me." She leaned closer, whispering, "Time." I frowned. "Time?" She nodded. I let it sit. I let it breathe. Food needs time, just like people. If you rush it, the flavor hides. But if you wait, the taste will come to you. At that moment, I thought it was just another riddle. Years later, I understood. She wasn't only teaching me how to cook. She was teaching me patience. Another secret I discovered by chance. One day, I saw her unfold a small faded handkerchief. On it were neat but trembling words, written in her hand. 1 spoon of soy sauce when the moon is thin. Stir gently, as if calming a child. They weren't instructions from a cookbook. They were whispers from her life, reminders of moments she wanted to preserve, fragments of her heart. To her, a recipe was never about exact amounts. It was about memory, about carrying a piece of herself into every dish. As children, we never knew. We thought she was just cooking, just filling our stomachs. But in those bowls of soup and plates of rice, she was giving us something much greater. She was teaching us how to live. And though many years have passed, when I taste those flavors again, I still feel her hand on my shoulder, gently guiding me, whispering, "Eat well, live well, and never forget to wait." Part 2. Time passed, as it always does. I grew older, and the gatherings at my grandmother's house became less frequent. But the memory of her kitchen stayed with me, like a fragrance that lingers long after the fire has gone out. One rainy afternoon, years after she had passed, I returned to her old house. The rooms were quiet now, filled with dust and shadows. I opened the wardrobe, the same heavy wooden, one that had stood in the corner for decades. Inside were folded blankets, a bundle of clothes, and beneath them, something I had never noticed before, a small leather-bound notebook, its cover worn and faded with age. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The pages were yellowed, edges frayed, yet the writing was still clear. It was my grandmother's handwriting. The first page simply read, "Recipes for the Heart." I turned the page and began to read. "Boil slowly with patience. Add laughter before serving. Do not forget to taste with love. These were not recipes as the world knows them. There were no measurements, no precise cooking times. Instead, each entry was half instruction, half memory. When the wind rattles the windows, make porridge and stir until the sound feels softer. When the family is tired, fry pancakes so the air fills with comfort. I read each page as though it were a secret letter written to me. Each line felt alive, whispering lessons I had overlooked in my youth. She had not written these for strangers. She had written them for us, her family, her children, her grandchildren, for anyone who might one day forget what it meant to be nourished, not just fed. In the middle of the notebook, there was a page that stopped me. It read, "Do not fear hunger. Fear an empty table without love." I closed my eyes and felt her presence in the room. The old house seemed less empty then, as if she were standing beside me, smiling in silence. I kept turning the pages. Some were smudged with stained soy sauce, perhaps, or oil marks left from years of use. Others carried short notes that were more like diary entries than recipes. The children laughed so much today. I added an extra spoon of joy to the stew. He was tired after work. The soup needed more salt, but he said it was perfect. Each line was a glimpse of her life, her struggles, her triumphs, her love. She had poured herself into these words, just as she had poured herself into every dish she served us. I realized then that her notebook was not about food at all. It was about connection, about remembering that cooking was never only about filling the stomach. It was about filling the heart. I sat there for a long time, the sound of rain tapping softly against the windows, the weight of the notebook resting in my hands. It was as if I had been handed a treasure more valuable than gold. I thought of all the times I had hurried through meals, eating without tasting, living without pausing, and I understood why she wrote those words. Let it breathe. Let it rest. Time will bring out the flavor. Her lessons extended beyond the kitchen. They were lessons for life itself. To wait. To breathe. To trust that what is meant to be will ripen in its own time. As the rain fell outside, I whispered to the empty room, "I understand now, Grandma. I finally understand." And for the first time in many years, I felt her warmth return, not in food, but in memory, in words, and in the quiet beating of my own heart. Part 3. Years passed, and life carried me far from my grandmother's kitchen. I moved to the city, where buildings touched the sky, and silence was replaced by the hum of cars and hurried footsteps. My own kitchen was small, barely enough space for a single stove and a shelf of dishes. But in that little corner, I tried to recreate the world she had once built for me. I remember the first time I cooked alone. The rice stuck to the bottom of the pot. The stew was too salty, and the pan smoked so much the neighbors knocked on my door. I laughed, though there was no one to laugh with me. And yet, even in that mess, I felt her beside me, guiding my hands, whispering, "Don't rush. Let it breathe." Many nights, after long days of work, I would come home tired. I would open the refrigerator and see only a few simple ingredients. Some rice, a bit of kimchi, maybe an egg. I would fry them together, making a humble dish. But as the smell filled the air, memories of my grandmother's table returned. It never tasted exactly like hers. Something was always missing. At first I thought it was skill, but then I realized it was time, patience, the invisible seasoning she always spoke of. One evening, as I sat alone with my plate, I felt a sudden longing. I picked up the phone and called my mother. "Mom," I asked, "why can't I make it taste the same?" She chuckled softly on the other end. "Because you're trying to cook food. Your grandmother was cooking love." Those words stayed with me. I began to understand that the kitchen was not only a place to prepare meals, but a place where emotions found form, where care became soup, where patience became stew, where laughter was baked into bread. Slowly, I stopped worrying about perfect recipes. I stopped measuring every spoon. And instead, I listened to the rhythm of the food. I stirred when it felt right. I tasted when the scent told me it was ready. And I let silence fill the space between each step. Cooking became less about survival and more about connection. Even when I was alone, I felt part of something larger, a chain of hands, from my grandmother to my mother, and now to me. On nights when the city outside was too loud, I would light a small candle, place a simple bowl of rice before me, and whisper to the quiet, "Thank you, Grandma. I'm still learning." And somehow, in that tiny kitchen, the food began to taste a little closer to hers, not because the ingredients had changed, but because my heart had. Part 4. Time has a way of scattering people. My cousins grew up, my uncles and aunts grew older, and family gatherings became rare. But one year, during the holidays, we all came together again, in the same house where my grandmother had once fed us. The air was filled with noise and laughter, children running through the halls, voices overlapping, pots clattering in the kitchen. For a moment, it felt as if the years had rolled back, as if my grandmother would appear at any second, carrying a steaming pot of stew. But the doorway remained empty. It was my turn now. I stood in the kitchen, nervous, holding her old notebook in my hands. My cousins peeked in, teasing, "So, are you going to cook Grandma's stew?" I smiled, though my heart raced. Could I really do it? Could I capture even a shadow of her flavor? I began slowly, washing the vegetables, slicing the meat, setting the pot on the stove. The smells rose, familiar yet uncertain, as if testing me. I remembered her words. "Don't rush. Let it breathe." Hours passed, and finally the table was filled. Dishes of rice, soup, and side plates lined the surface. I watched as my family sat down, their faces full of anticipation and memory. We took the first bite together. The room fell silent for a moment. Then, slowly, smiles appeared. Someone laughed. Someone wiped away a tear. And I realized it didn't taste exactly like hers. It never could. But it carried enough of her spirit to bring us together again. Around that table, stories began to flow. My uncle spoke of the times she scolded him for sneaking food. My aunt remembered how she saved coins to buy treats for the children. My cousins laughed about running barefoot through her yard. And as we shared, I felt the food doing its work. It wasn't just filling our stomachs. It was stitching us back together. In that moment, I understood what she had meant all along. A recipe is not a set of instructions. It is a memory, a gift, a bridge between generations. That night, as we cleared the table and washed the dishes, I looked at my family tired, laughing, content, and I thought, "Grandma, you're still here." Not in the kitchen, not in the notebook, but in us, in every story, in every bite that reminds us of home. Part 5. The notebook had grown thinner as I turned each page, until at last I reached the very end. There were no long instructions, no detailed notes, just a single line, written in my grandmother's steady hand: "Add love." I stared at those words for a long time. They were so simple, almost too simple, and yet they carried the weight of her entire life. I thought back to the countless meals she had prepared, the mornings when she rose before dawn to boil rice, the evenings when she stayed by the fire long after everyone else had gone to sleep. I remembered the way she pressed food into our bowls, even when she herself had barely eaten. Love was the first ingredient, the last ingredient, the one she never wrote down. Until now, years later, when I cooked for my own children, I found myself repeating her gestures, placing the best piece of meat on their rice, blowing gently on the soup before serving, saving the last bite for them, not for myself. Without thinking, I was carrying her recipe forward. One evening, my daughter looked up at me and asked, "Why does your food taste so warm?" I laughed softly, my throat tightening. "Because I use one ingredient you can't see." She tilted her head, curious. "What is it?" I whispered, just as my grandmother once whispered to me, "Love." The truth is, her recipes were never about food. They were about life itself. She taught me that patience brings depth, that laughter makes things lighter, and that love transforms even the simplest meal into a feast. When I gather my family now, I no longer worry about perfection. I cook slowly with open hands, letting the smells fill the air, letting the memories flow into every dish. Around the table, I watch faces soften, stories rise, and bonds grow stronger. And in those moments, I feel her presence, not as a memory, but as a living part of us. Her recipe continues, carried in every hand that stirs, in every mouth that tastes, in every heart that remembers. So if you ask me now, what was your grandmother's secret? I will tell you this. It was never written in the pages of a notebook. It was written in the way she lived. And though the notebook grows older, though the ink fades, the recipe remains. Eat well, live well, and never forget the final ingredient, love.